Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of The Pathbreakers. This is Aloka Banerjee Sham, and joining me is Divya Sampath. The year was 1767. The Maratha Confederacy still stood tall. The Maratha Confederacy actually had reached its zenith during the reign of Peshwa Bajirao I of Bajirao Mastani fame. He ruled between 1720 and 1740. Currently, in 1767, the real seat of power was Madhavrao I, the grandson of Bajirao I, who ruled from Shaniwarwara, Pune. Shivaji's successor, Rajaram Bhosle, who ruled from Satara, he was merely a figurehead. Now, in the midst of all this, there was a conspiracy which was brewing. And in the heart of this conspiracy was Raghunath Rao, also known as Raghoba, who was the younger son of Bajirao I. Now, Raghunath Rao was extremely unhappy that his nephew, Madhavrao I, had ascended the throne instead of him.
So Raghunath Rao had set his eyes on Malwa, one of the powerful provinces ruled by a Maratha Subedar or governor under the command of the Peshwas. He had an army of 50,000 men and he was camped on the banks of the Shipra river outside Ujjain, and he planned to advance to Indore, the capital of Malwa. He was pretty confident he would face very little opposition. After all, the great Subedar Malhar Rao, Bajirao's right-hand man, had passed away in 1766, and a year later, his grandson who had succeeded him, Male Rao, had also perished without leaving behind a male successor. The only person standing between Raghoba and the throne of Malwa was a woman, Ahilyabai Holkar, daughter-in-law of the late Malhar Rao and grieving mother of the recently deceased Male Rao, who had perished without a male successor. Ahilyabai had taken the reins of Malwa after the death of her father-in-law in 1766. The opportunity saw a hapless widow at Indore who was still grieving and running the kingdom. The ambitious Diwan of the kingdom, Gangadhar Yashwant Chandra Chud, who was actually a trusted companion of Malhar Rao, approached Ahilyabai with a proposal to adopt a son and make him a subedar so that he himself could run the kingdom. While Ahilya sensed his sinister plans of sidelining her, Gangadhar Pant secretly sent an invitation to Raghuba, promising him the control of Malwa. Raghuba saw an opening to assert his dominance over Malwa. So while Raghuba had begun rallying his forces to march to Malwa, Ahilyabai, through her own spy network, had got a whiff of the conspiracy that was taking place behind her back. So she went to court and she actually took the reins of the state and she declared, "Let there be no misconception that being a woman I'm weak or helpless in any way." She wrote a letter to the Peshwa Madhav Rao informing him about the conspiracy and securing his approval so that Tukaji Rao, who was the adopted son of Malhar Rao and also part of the Holkar family, could be made Subedar while she managed the state affairs. Not only that, she also enlisted help from other powerful Maratha Subedars like the Scindias and the Gaikwads. So while Raghuba had come to the banks of the Shipra, she already had her army ready. Across the river, the two armies confronted each other. On one side, Raghunath Rao's 50,000 seasoned Maratha force, and on the other, the combined force of not just the Holkars, but other Maratha chieftains. And in the lead, Queen Ahilyabai herself at the head of a battalion of women. At this interesting juncture, Ahilyabai penned a letter to Raghunath Rao, and it was a masterpiece in psychological strategy. She said that as a woman, defeating her would bring him no especial pride or glory. But on the other hand, should he be defeated by her and her women, the disgrace would not just be his, but it would be a stain on the entire Peshwa legacy. The words certainly struck a chord with Raghuba, forcing him to reconsider his entire campaign. He is said to have exclaimed, "What helpless woman! This is a liaress." So Chaser Raghuba is said to have excused himself, claiming that he had merely intended to come to Malwa to convey his condolences and participate in the funerary rites of the late Male Rao. To which Ahilyabai responded with dignity, explaining that to do that he needed no army and he would be perfectly safe and secure he would be as safe and secure in Malwa as he would be in Shaniwarwada itself. So Raghuba ends up leaving his army behind and with his family and his personal entourage, crosses and into Indore, where he spends an entire month enjoying royal hospitality. And he and his entire family and entourage finally leave, laden with gifts and with nothing to complain about. The gifts incidentally included fine fabrics from the skilled weavers of Maheshwar, who had been assembled and supported by Queen Ahilyabai herself.
So Ahilyabai actually, Divya, she actually emerged victorious without shedding a single drop of blood. I mean, I don't think anybody would have thought that here is a woman who is grieving, and here she comes out with this master stroke in military action, and she did not shed blood, and she just won the war. And this episode is such a testament to her brilliance as a military leader. So, welcome to today's episode of the Pathbreakers, where we delve into the life of Ahilyabai Holkar. This is Aloka Banerjee Sham, and joining me is Divya Sampath. Karma Yogini, Lokmata, Shiv Bhaktini, Punya Slok, Pure as the Ganges are some of the titles that Ahilyabai had acquired, given to her by historians and various leaders. But the title that she really loved was Matusri, because she was like a mother to all her subjects. Many of us know of her as somebody who has restored Hindu temples like the Somnath or the Kashi Vishwanath temple. But Ahilyabai Holkar left behind a legacy of governance, diplomacy, and benevolence. During her rule of 30 years, Malwa not only prospered economically, but her army under the commander of Tukoji Holkar helped the Maratha Confederacy under Madhav Rao, who is once again the grandson of Baji Rao I, to consolidate their position against the Mughals in Delhi, Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali in the south, as well as keep the East India Company at bay. Today, let us explore the various shades of this incredible, indomitable woman leader who inspire us even generations later. Let us start with her early life. Ahilyabai had very humble beginnings. She was born on May 31st, 1725 in Chandi village near Aurangabad in modern-day Maharashtra. Her father, Malkoji Shinde, was a village chieftain and taught his daughter to read and write, which was rare for women of her time. Her intelligence and character caught the attention of Malhara Holkar, a commander in the Maratha army at a local Shiva temple in 1733. He arranged her to marry his son, who was 10 years and she 8 years at the time of her marriage.
Marriage turned out to be not exactly a bed of roses for Ahilyabai. She had her share of challenges with Khandirao, though by all accounts she was very fortunate with her parents-in-law. Both her father-in-law, his first wife Gautamabai Holkar, as well as he had multiple wives. She also had good relationships with Malhar Rao's other wives as well. By all accounts, her influence proved to be positive on Khandirao, who was otherwise apparently given to a few dissipated habits, which she helped to check. They ended up having a fairly successful and harmonious marriage, and Ahilyabai was in fact trained in both administrative and military affairs by her parents-in-law right alongside her husband. They were being groomed to obviously take over the throne of Malwa in the future. Let's place also a little bit of historical context to Ahilyabai Holkar and her times. You already mentioned, Aloka, two of her contemporaries at the time, just in terms of geographic proximity. There were the Scindias who were ruling Gwalior. This was the time of the Peshwa and, who was ruling at the time was Madhav Rao, the grandson of Bajirao I, as you said, who was well known in popular culture due to films like Bajirao Mastani. Also, this is the time when Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan were making inroads not just from their headquarters in the state of Mysore, in Srirangapatnam. This was also the time of Arthur Wellesley, who the future Duke of Wellington, who would first make his name in the wars against Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali, and later on go on to defeat Napoleon in Battle of Waterloo ultimately. This was also the time where in Russia you had Catherine the Great, who was well known as an enlightened and forward-looking ruler. The Americas was George Washington, because America was just starting its war of revolution at a fairly similar period of time. And from an economic standpoint, this is also the period when Adam Smith was to write and publish Wealth of Nations, which had such a huge influence on economic. So this is the world that Ahilyabai Holkar was living in, and as the saying goes, those were interesting times. So Ahilyabai Holkar's period coincided with a with many significant changes in India. In 1761, the Maratha Confederacy had suffered a crushing defeat at the Third Battle of Panipat, where they were defeated by the forces of the Durrani Empire under Ahmad Shah Abdali. This was also the time when the British East India Company was making serious efforts to increase its span of influence.
And actually, like you said, the third battle of Panipat, and we'll start this. I mean, we will talk a little bit of Malhar Holkar. But in his entire military career at Divya, actually, when what we discussed, the one of the biggest plot that he had, because he did not. This was one battle which did not go well for him or his career. So he had won a lot of battles under the leadership of Bajirao or Peshwa, where they actually took away Malwa from the Mughals. I mean, Malwa was given to Malhar Rao Holkar by Peshwa Baji Rao after it was taken, after Malhar Rao won it from the declining Mughal empire. And we shall right now discuss Malhar Rao a little more detail, because Malhar Rao Holkar actually played a very important role, not only in for the Maratha Empire, but also in the life of Ahilya Bai Holkar. Malhar Rao was the founder of the Holkar dynasty. He was actually given the region of Malwa in 1930 by Peshwa Baji Rao after he had won it from the then Mughal leadership. Yeah, so he established the Holkar rule in Malwa and set up the city of Indore in 1745. And he started populating Maheshwar by giving state patronage to people who actually came and settled there, right?
Another interesting influence, as you said, Malhar Rao was a huge influence on Ahilya Bai Holkar's life, as was his first wife Gautama Bai Holkar. Interestingly, Peshwa Badi Rao, with Malhar Rao's full support, had actually conferred territories directly to Gautama Bai as her Khazki. So Malhar Rao was very supportive of this innovation, where they separated the state treasury from the personal wealth of the Holkars, which was really the women's inheritance, which was managed directly by the women in the family. So Gautama Bai was also educated, extremely able, and a great partner to Malhar Rao. And all of these Khazki properties or Jagirs were directly in her names, which generated a huge amount of revenue, as you can imagine, including Maheshwar Bai. And this eventually passed to Ahilya Bai Holkar, which we speak more about. So they were both great influences in her personal life as well as in her capacity as ruler of Malwa.
Yes, so like you just started saying, Divya, Malhar Rao played a very pivotal role in mentoring Ahilya Bai and actually ensured that she received the kind of training and education side by side her husband Khandai Rao, which actually groomed her to take over the reins of the empire or the state, which she did later. And Ahilya Bai, Divya, like you were mentioning, she also forged lifelong relationship with Harku Bai, who was Malhar Rao's younger wife, and his sister Udabai. When in 1745, her son was born. Malai Rao was born in 1745, and in 1748, their daughter Muktabai was born. And she was just beginning to settle down, rather, in her married life when tragedy struck once again.
In 1754, as you said, Aloka tragedy struck. Khandai Rao was killed by cannon fire during the siege of Kumbher, very unexpectedly. And initially, the tradition of sati was fairly prevalent in those days. And Ahilya Bai initially intended to follow her husband on the funeral pyre and commit sati. But she was prevented by Malhar Rao and Gautama Bai, who pleaded with her to not leave them behind. Malhar Rao is said to have said, "You are going to be my son from now on. So if you go, who will take care of the kingdom?" Wives and concubines, I believe up to 11 in some accounts, did Sumit 11 of them did commit sat, including, I believe, 2 Muslim concubines, whose names were included in the ritual recitations at the insistence of Ahilya Bai. And I think sources have told us that Muslim concubines were named Shabnam and Sakina. And we would not have remembered their names had it not been for Ahilya Bai's insistence that if they could commit sati along with the Hindu wives, they deserve to be remembered equally in the rites and rituals and so on and so forth.
And she overruled religious objections. She also overruled, according to some sources, objections by her own father, who actually was saying, by some sources, is said to have walked out of that ceremony. But she said that if they're good enough, being a Muslim, to perform sati, they're good enough for their names to be recited during the cremation and during the Srat ceremony.
That's right. So 1761 was really tragic for the Holkars as well as the Maratha Confederacy. Not only was the third battle of Panipat, which is a crushing defeat, occurred, but Gautama Bai also passed. So at this stage, as I mentioned, in 1734, Peshwa Baji Rao had conferred several jagis directly to Gautama Bai as for Kasgi properties. And these properties on Gautama Bai's passing in 1761 passed into Ahilya Bai's control. So this meant that the private fortune, which was a considerable amount, had passed into the control and administration of Ahilya Bai, who still continued to lead, like her mother-in-law herself, a very simple life.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, the sequence of tragedy continues because in 1766, Malhar Rao himself passes away, and another huge titan who had such a huge influence on Ahilya Bai's life was also gone. And her son, her young son, Male Rao, ascended to the throne in 1766 following his grandfather's passing. Fortunately, there are various accounts. He was not very competent. Now, there are varying historical sources accounting for this. Some say he had a mental illness, some say that he was addicted to drink and drugs, and so on. Whatever be the causes, he apparently had a very short and not very successful stint as the on the throne of Malwa, and unfortunately passed away in 1767, just a year after his grandfather, leaving Malwa in the precarious situation that we discussed at the start of the episode.
Yeah. So, like when we are talking, we just were talking about Ahilya Bai's life. We just realized that her personal life was definitely far from an ideal life that she would have had to live with a husband who was far from ideal, or even her son, who, like Divya rightly mentioned, different sources say that he was into addiction. He was sometimes cruel to his subjects, but we can safely say he was not competent in the eyes of Ahilya Bai to be the successor who could take over from Malhar Rao. So, coming back to Male Rao's death in 1767, Ahilya Bai took on the responsibilities of the Holkar dynasty. She was formally recognized as the ruler of Malwa on December 11th, 1767. Ahilya Bai also had a daughter, Mukta Bai, and she was married to Yashwantrao Phanse, who was a prominent soldier, but he was from an ordinary family. So here, Ahilya Bai actually chose somebody who had capabilities, irrespective of him not coming from a noble legacy. So he chose capability for her as his son-in-law because he actually helped her quash a few rebellion by the Bhils and some dacoits. And that's how he was endeared to her and took her daughter as his wife. But unfortunately, even Yashwant Rao passed away pretty early and he died in 1791. And Muktabai actually committed sati. For listeners who are not aware of what sati is, it is self-immolation on the same fire in which your husband is being cremated. That is sati. Ahilya Bai actually had seen so many women very close to her, family members who had actually performed sati, like the 11 wives or concubines of her husband. Then the two wives of Male Rao, her son, performed sati. Her daughter performed sati. Uh, she tried in her own way to actually stop sati, but during her reign, somehow she could not abolish. But however, she left it to the women to decide whether they wanted to perform sati or not.
And that's an interesting point, and we will talk about it a little bit more in the episode in terms of her support of surviving widows and how she really went out of her way to protect widows, right? So we'll certainly talk about that a little bit. But let's also talk about, as you said, Aloka, she had a very challenging life in terms of her personal life. She had numerous challenges. Certainly, as a ruler of Malwa, she faced several challenges as well. But her contributions in such turbulent times, her leadership was absolutely remarkable. She 30 years of peace and stability for Malwa, with very few exceptions. And whatever military or civil challenges she faced, she handled them all with great grace. So several authors have commented about this as well, right? Even I think I first heard this story about Ahilya Bai Holkar's peaceful reign when I was watching this adaptation of Bharati Coach, The Discovery of India by Jawaharlal Nehru, which was on Doordarshan when we were kids, right? And there, it actually talked about Ahilya Bai and her peaceful reign. And a few years later, I discovered that her statue is one of the very few women statues in the Indian Parliament. That's the kind of icon she was to people who truly saw the value of her leadership. She not only protected the security of her kingdom, she implemented a fair and efficient taxation system. She implemented policies that grew the economy. She worked actively on social justice for people of from backward classes, from economically poorer struggles. She worked and she established diplomatic relationships, even with the tribes who had been waging guerrilla warfare at the borders of Malwa. She came to a peaceful settlement with them by giving them rights to tax travelers and so on. Yeah, and she provided incentive to farmers. She gave grants and loans to people establishing businesses. It was truly, in so many ways, a golden age for Malwa. And she invested so much in infrastructure as well. A lot of which is still standing today. You actually see if you travel through erstwhile Kingdom of Malwa, which now stretches across a couple of different states in India. If you go to Maheshwar or Indore or Bhopal, the infrastructure she built, from the forts to the roads to the step wells to the ghats on the river on the river Narmada, to the roads stretching from the length and breadth of Malwa. Many of the things that she built are still standing and functional today, and people are still enjoying the benefit of her far-sighted investments. So truly an exceptional leader in her time, but also I think in any time.
Yeah, absolutely. Divya, and like you rightly said, her financial acumen was so amazing, and she in an interesting part which we were discussing about taxation is she actually had lower taxes for essential goods so that it doesn't burden the common man. I mean, her acumen was amazing. Taking her leadership forward, I mean, Ahilya Bai was responsible for actually a cultural and architectural renaissance, what we can call rightfully. She was a patron of art, literature, religion, and she commissioned construction of temples, ghats, and wells, step wells across India. It is not that she stopped in constructing the step wells only within her realm. She went beyond her realm and she did it across India. She was a very religious person. She personally went for pilgrimages to Pandharpur, Mathura, Kashi. And while she visited those places, she actually firsthand realized the challenges that pilgrims faced. So she set up not only roads, but she built a lot of dharamshalas across the country. I mean, she worked from Badrinath to Rameshwaram in the south, from Jagannath Puri in the east to Dwarka in the west. So you can just imagine the spread and the expanse of of the work that she has done. And she constructed numerous ghats. I mean, I'm sure anybody who has gone to Kashi would know about the Dashashwamedh Ghat, the Manikarnika Ghats. These are all constructed by Ahilyabai Holkar. Other than the magnificent ghats in the city of Maheshwar along the river Narmada, anybody who has visited Maheshwar, I think this is still maintained even today as one of the cleanest ghats that I've seen across India. Beautiful ghats, the ghats where you get tempted to take a dip in the Narmada when you see those ghats.
I still remember last year I had gone to Maheshwar for some work, and we actually did witness Narmada Aarti in the evening. It happens outside the Ahilya Fort, which is now a 7-star hotel. And the interesting thing is, as you said, Aloka, the two things strike me as very important when we talk about her legacy beyond the borders of Malwa as well. One, all of these places where she built all of this infrastructure was controlled by other rulers. So she had to have such excellent diplomatic relationship with people of all backgrounds, geographies, right? Like you said, from Jagannath Puri in the east to Dwarka in the west to Badrinath in the north to Rameshwaram in the south. She had good diplomatic relationship with the rulers of all these different states. And she managed to get all of this infrastructure built, and it was financed out of her personal wealth, the Khasgi wealth. The Khasgi trust, not out of the state treasury of Malwa. She kept that very strictly separate, and the Holkar properties, the personal properties, the Jagis, those incomes and revenues were used to finance all of these philanthropic activities. So that again is very, very striking. She rarely spent money on herself as well.
She actually set up things in Vrindavan. She actually set up places for the widows. Where she actually set habitat centers for the widows to be rehabilitated. So wherever she went, she touched lives everywhere she went, kind of, And like a lot of historians actually also see her, Divya, as somebody, as we were just touching a little bit on the Renaissance, because prior to her, India had seen a lot of wanderings. And she actually restored a lot of those temples, which were plundered earlier by an Aram, or like a Kashi Vishwanath temple. Like, she restored it at almost 80 years after the death of Arun, and it got restored. And not only did she did not stop at restoring, she actually built a trust. So even today, the trust was is set up to even today look after those Jyotirlings, because that Ahilyabai Holkar Trust even today sends either Ganga Jal or tributes or upkeep or restoration of the Jyotirlings and quite a few other temples across the country. So it is not just doing and stopping there. It is also having the foresight to see that the restoration continues and the temples continue to shining bright in India.
Yeah. So, and I think one of the reasons why this was such a masterstroke of diplomacy is that by building all of this infrastructure, restoring temples, building dharamshalas, roads, shelters, uh, she was clearly investing in those local economies because, when pilgrims travel, obviously they spend money as well and it sort of stimulates the local economies. And that exchange of people also sort of facilitates a little bit of trust. As you said, these were very turbulent times, and a lot of temples had been destroyed, public infrastructure had been destroyed. And by restoring these, especially along popular pilgrim trails, the outcome was not just a religious benefit, but also an economic benefit and also uh, contributing to a sense of, public safety and peace, that you could go on a pilgrimage and use this infrastructure, despite the fact that you may be traveling across 3 or 4 kingdoms ruled by different rulers. And it's a wonder that she acquired all those epithets, right, that you mentioned, Punya Shlok and Mata Lokmata. Those came from genuine respect.
That and like you rightly said, it was also the diplomatic relations, and she's also stimulated the economies of those places by building those. When we come talk about that, we were talking about how she was loved, right? We just started saying and how she was loved by the people. But like you rightly said, Divya, Ahilyabai actually was given the titles of Lokmata, Punya Slok, because she really cared for them, and she genuinely cared for her people. And her sense of justice, like we have seen from, we'll talk about a couple of anecdotes here, which show that she really didn't differentiate whether the person who committed something was a person from her family or was one of her royal subedas, or just a widow who came to her door to ask for justice. This is the anecdote that which we come to know about how she was very empathetic about not only about the substance but widows in particular. So there was this widow who was a rich businessman's wife who came to her with a complaint that one of her trusted subidas had asked for a bribe because she wanted to adopt a son, because her husband had died without being able to continue the progeny. So when Ahilyabai heard this story, one thing interesting about Ahilyabai is when somebody comes to her with a complaint, she has an entire network of spies, so she definitely ratifies whether the complainant is actually right or no. So she already had the spy network give her information about this particular chief who has had other blemishes also in the past. She actually calls him and suspends him for 6 months, warning him that this an incident like this should never happen again. And she also goes on to sponsor so the widow who adopts the son can actually look after the son. The Alia by herself was very, very empathetic about all widows. She actually gave them to property. So the widows would get right to property from their husband is something that she had passed. She did a lot for all the widows. And the widows, even for sati, she gave the right to the widows that it was their choice whether they wanted to perform sati or not the rest of the families. So I think that goes on to say what she really fought for women's rights, Divya. And she fought even for her daughter not to go for sati, but the daughter chose to go for sati. And she was there for the women. When she was making Maheshwar a center of learning, she actually had a lot of women who joined her schools, the schools that she had set up. a lot of women joined those schools. So the girls and the women, she actually encouraged women to be educated and well read because she herself was.
Yeah, true. And not only did she lead by example, but she encouraged women to participate. So, as we said, she set up a women's battalion. So there were women who went to war. She encouraged them to be educated, to own property. She changed the legal system, so she passed laws which would make it easier for surviving widows. And incidentally, not just Hindu widows practice sati, but women of other religions as well, to have rights to manage property, to have rights to adopt heirs if they didn't have male children of their own to succeed their husbands. And she was incredibly progressive in that sense, but at the same time, very respectful of traditions.
As I said, for when it came to her family, even for any financial transgression, she showed zero tolerance. There's a little anecdote where her husband, I believe, had overspent the monthly money that was given to him. So and she was looking after the treasury at that point of time. She refused to increase his monthly allowance. But as a wife, he actually gave a few of her ornaments, which she got as a gift from her marriage, so that he did not have to go empty handed. So that's the kind of balance she kind of maintained.
Yeah, and you're so right, Aloka. And I think it's so interesting that you and I have talked about it. So fascinating to read the translations of her original correspondence, which are still maintained in the Holkar archives. Unfortunately, some of these translations are available in online archives as well for people like you and I to read. And it's so interesting to see the correspondence between her and, for example, her brother-in-law Tukodira, who was the Subedar or the military patron of Malwa, even after she had taken over as queen of Malwa. There are so many instances where she admonishes him for overspending military money and spending money on frivolous causes. And there are letters where she is actually admonished the Tehsildar of Indore to say, "Do not indulge Tukodira's claims if he wants any more money, because that's not a legitimate claim." And it was because she really wanted to manage the treasury of the state of Malwa. She saw that as a very strong responsibility to maintain a strong financial condition, because the security of the state did depend on it. Something which her Mandhar Rao had also instilled in her. He always kind of trained her to keep a close eye on the financial situation of the treasury. And that is something that she displayed throughout her life. It was such a renaissance of the state of Malwa that the population of Malwa increased. People actually came and settled in Malwa, whether it was the weavers and bankers and businessmen who came to Maheshwar, whom she incentivized.
Yeah, and like you rightly said, I mean, for years, even when Maharao was the Subedar, for years she was the one who was responsible for sending in the rations and the war equipment wherever he was away battling. So she had that years in her, but she realized that I have to keep for bad days, and there's still planning that went into that. Is what I think, which she took forward during her reign as well. You'd want to talk about her little bit of her military, but how she actually engaged the Frenchman. I mean, again, shows her foresight and acumen.
Yeah, I think we should talk a little bit overall about her military accomplishments. By all accounts, she was a trained and skillful archer. She had personally gone to war on elephant back with her howdah, with quivers of arrows strapped to all four corners, and she's conducted campaigns and won them. When she took over the administration of Malwa, she had appointed Tukodira, who was Malhar Rao's adopted son, to be the Subedar or the military chieftain who would then answer the Peshwa's call whenever the Maratha army was called to go to war. But she also realized that they were surrounded by all kinds of enemies, right? They had the Europeans, the British East India Company, the French, the Portuguese were present on the western coast, the various powerful subordinates of the Mughal Empire, the southern dynasties. So she realized the need to modernize the Holkar armies. And she actually, as you mentioned, Aloka, appointed a French Chevalier Dudrenik to modernize the armies of Malwa, which stood them in good stead for many years because it helped them to actually keep the East India Company at bay.
Yeah, so her reign is actually considered to be the zenith of the Holkar dynasty, marked by peace, stability, and progress, as we were just discussing. And she herself led a very simple life. Why one of the main accomplishments of the development of Indore, from a very small village to a very prosperous and beautiful city, which was, while her own capital was Maheshwar, but she actually did a lot of work for Indore as well. she ensured that Maheshwar prospered, like Divya was just mentioning, the Maheshwari saris. She gave a lot of self patronage for the weavers to come and develop the Maheshwari saris, and she helped them through and through. Even today, Maheshwari sari is a very coveted item across India. And she also wanted Maheshwar to be a seat of learning, second none but to Kashi. So she entertained the very famous Marathi poet Morpant and the Sahid Anand Fandi, who came from Maharashtra, to her court. And there's a little anecdote here which I read somewhere, that when Anand Fandi came to her court first, he actually started eulogizing her, and his songs was all about her. While she actually told him, why don't you do kirtan? From when Anantafandi started doing kirtan, and which she became very famous for, she also patronized a Sanskrit scholar called Kaushali Ram. So she actually had a lot of discourses in Sanskrit on the banks of the Narmada because she wanted Maheshwar to develop a center of learning.
You're so right. And there's this interesting anecdote, which is possibly folkloric, but apparently a poet, not Anantapandi, he's another poet, wrote a book of poems in her praise, eulogies to her, and she's supposed to have flung it into the Narmada because she couldn't stand flattery. And but as you were saying, Aloka, the town of Maheshwar continued to grow and develop, and it's so interesting to see when you actually even today when you enter the Maheshwar fort, the dwar is Ahilya Dwar, and it's a short walk. There's a statue on the left hand side as you kind of walk up off Ahilya Bai, and it's a large statue, and you proceed in, and you can actually still see where she used to hold court and meet citizens who had come to see her. And her chair and her throne are still there. There's a small courtyard. Her own personal dwelling is just a very simple two-story. It's not a palatial mansion or anything like that. It's a simple two-story building, and it's been preserved to a large extent to be in the same condition that it was when she lived there. You can see that the life that she personally led was fairly austere and simple. She certainly didn't stint on spending money where it was due in terms of you see the beauty of the fort and the temples in Maheshwar and the sturdiness of the construction as well as the artistic decoration. It's beautiful. And the simple gaddi that she used to sit on, her palanquin is still there on the portico as you walk in.
On all viewers and listeners is that you should definitely visit Maheshwar because you not only get to know a lot about Ahilya Bai herself and her style, lifestyle and her reign, but it's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful city on the banks of the Narmada.
I was going to say, so when you land in Indore, you're landing in an airport that's named after her. And it's a lovely drive from Indore to Maheshwar.
So coming back to Maheshwar and her temple town, so like Divya was mentioning, that while the town prospered and grew, her own dwelling was a very simple two-story place which overlooked the Narmada, and she actually visited the Narmada every morning. Every morning, she appeared in court wearing a simple white sari and no ornaments. Definitely safely say that her meals were very simple, and thousands were fed from her kitchen on a daily basis. She was very accessible to all her subjects and held daily audiences with the people whenever they could approach her. She established courts of justice. Also, the other thing about her was her panchayats were all they were all self-governed. They were capable of self-governing. So she actually delegated a lot of administrative power to her panchayats. We also discussed this earlier that she was very close to the common man, and like we had one of the things we discussed earlier, that she got her own daughter married to somebody who was not from a very noble family, but who just earned his praise through his capabilities.
So you're right. I think one of the other amazing things about her is that she clearly wanted to promote a meritocracy, whether it was Yashwant Rao Phanse, who became her son-in-law after displaying military valor, to choosing people to serve in her administration. And it's interesting, we have so many details about her life because, of course, you have her own surviving correspondence, etc. But one of the earliest English language writers who wrote about her in great detail was John Malcolm. So when he was writing about Ahilya Bai and, about her reign over Malwa, he was initially a little bit skeptical that could she have been so perfect? Because her reputation was so good that he became a little skeptical and he went out and actually looked for more evidence. And at the end, I love this quote. So I'm actually going to literally quote what he said because he said, the more inquiry is pursued, the more admiration is excited. In the most sober view that can be taken, Ahilyabai Holkar was one of the purest and most exemplary rulers that ever existed. And this, by the way, was from someone who was an opponent and was instrumental in subjugating the former independent Holkar rulers. So pretty interesting and remarkable, I would say.
Absolutely. So, like we already mentioned, her personal life is very simple. She woke up an hour before daybreak to say her prayers. Then she read her scriptures. She went to court. She rested for a while and again went back to court. She was there working till about 11 in the night. Her life was marked by service, prayer, abstinence, and you know uh, total devotion. I mean, she was totally devoted to the welfare of her state. So when we call Ahilyabai a Punya Sloka, she actually lived a life of a Punya Slok. Her ability of a ruler was that her territories in Malwa were not attacked or disrupted by local battles through her entire reign. In spite of wars all around, she kept almost the same set of ministers and administrators throughout her reign. And this we mentioned earlier, but we would all again mention she mounted an elephant armed with a bow and arrow and rode into battle. She did not just command, she led from the front. And she actually said, "Let my people see that their queen does not hide behind walls." She once again said, "Let my enemies know that Dharma rides with me." So that is Ahilyabai for you. Divya, you want to just mention about her legacy a little bit at this point? What happened after her?
Yeah. After, I think, an extremely successful reign, right, Anuka, we should talk about saying what happened, close to her death and after. She passed away on August 13, 1795 in Indore. And upon her death, she was succeeded by Tukurdira Holkar, her brother-in-law, who had been Subedar. He abdicated in his son Jaswant Rao's favor after a couple of years. Jaswant Rao, by all accounts, was an extremely capable young man, and he was unfortunately the last independent Holkar ruler until he was defeated in 1804 by the British. So even today, I think, as I said, there's a visible legacy in terms of what she left behind, or in terms of infrastructure across the length and breadth of the country. Anyone who goes to watch the Ganga Aarti even today is standing on a ghat just built by Ahilyabai.
That is the brilliance of that. She just traversed all across the country, and wherever she touched, she has resurrected. That is Ahilyabai Holkar's legacy. And this happens to be the 300th year of her birth. And 300 years later, we are still enamored and awe of her legacy that she has left behind.
Yeah.
In the book Discover, if you were talking about Jawaharlal Nehru in Discovery of India, he actually said that what a remarkable woman. And I'll quote what he said, that the reign of Ahilyabai of Indore in central India lasted for 30 years. This has become almost legendary. This is Jawaharlal Nehru describing her. This has become almost legendary as a period during which perfect order and good government prevailed and the people prospered. She was a very able ruler and organizer, highly respected during her lifetime and considered as a saint by a grateful people after her death. I think that totally encapsulates who Ahilyabai Holkar was, Divya. It was beautifully written and by Jawaharlal Nehru.
Yeah. But I think we should close on that lovely note where really pointing out that her leadership and vision, even 300 years after her birth, continue to inspire,
Yeah.
which is an
Divya,
example.
let's add a little bit on that. If you have talked about about her humble beginnings, she was a daughter of a chieftain. She was groomed by Malhar Rao to be to be an able administrator. She became not only an able administrator, she actually picked up military skills. So she was an amazing military leader. She was an astute financial governor of her state. She built these diplomatic relationships across with all, whether it's the South or Delhi, or obviously she had an amazing relationship with Shaniwar Wara throughout her reign. So this is a woman who started as a daughter of a village chieftain, and she became a queen who we worship even after 300 years. I think
Yeah.
that's the trajectory she traversed. So, at the Pathbreakers, we showcase women who have lived their lives as beacons of women empowerment. At every episode, we shall bring to you a story of a woman who has been a pathbreaker in her own right, in her own field. Thank you for tuning in. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
If you like our videos, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.